With summer right around the corner, it's time to tune up your ride for scooter season. Hey guys, it's Steve from Scooter King, and with summertime right around the corner, we're going to go over the top 5 maintenance categories to get your ride tuned up and ready for scooter season. So the first order of business is give your scooter kind of the once over. Check to make sure that everything is where you left it before the season ended last year. If you're lucky enough to live in a warm climate, this probably doesn't apply to you, but if you have to store it through the winter months, like we do up here in the Northwest, sometimes things can come loose or they can rattle loose, especially if you've had a really busy riding season. So just give the scooter a once over to make sure that everything is where you left it when you put it up. Start with a good quality set of Allen keys. These will save you a ton of headache in the future, just so that you're not constantly stripping bolts and stuff like that. And once you get these, go through each one of the nuts and bolts on your scooter. Tighten everything down back where it was before you started. If you had a heavy season of riding, a lot of this stuff surprisingly will come loose, especially things like the deck bolts themselves. If you have a deck that doesn't have a removable battery, these bolts get a lot of flex while you're riding constantly, and at the end of the season, they're always loose, especially up here right around like the latch mechanism and that kind of stuff. So check all of these and all the other nuts and bolts on your scooter, just to make sure that they're where you think they are. A surprising amount of them come loose at the end of a busy riding season. Next up is shocks. These are really responsible for a smooth and steady ride and your overall ride comfort. So make sure that they're free of obstructions, that you don't have a lot of rocks and dust and debris and grime and everything in there. Really go over all of the flex points of your shocks, not just the piston and plunge area, but also any of the flex areas attached to the frame. If you have dual shocks on the front, like the Kaabo and a lot of those things, or if you have a C-style suspension, make sure that all of the moving parts can move freely and are completely free of dirt and grime. Once your shocks are totally clean and free of dirt and debris, get a good quality lubricant that's silicone based. This is WD-40's Silicone Specialist, and it's safe for rubber, and that's important when you're working on shocks because they have internal rubber components sometimes. And then spray all the moving parts of the shock itself, including the swing arms. Make sure that all the parts of the swing arm can move freely and completely unobstructed. And it doesn't take a lot. You don't have to soak these things. It just needs a little bit of lubrication to work its way into those joints and to clean those off. If your scooter has a dual front fork style suspension or dual style suspension, clean all of the areas and lubricate each one of these moving parts as well, including the plungers and pistons. And again, this is why it's so important that this lubricant be safe for rubber. You don't want to damage the internal seals and those kinds of things that make up the inside of the shock itself. So don't use regular WD-40. Make sure you're using the Specialist silicone spray, which is safe for rubber. And go through all of the mechanism parts, not just the plunger and the piston areas, but also the moving joint and swing arm, and make sure all of those are free to travel and completely free of debris and dust or obstructions and dirt and rocks and that kind of stuff. You want a really smooth and freely moving part here so that your ride is safe, secure, but most of all, comfortable. And the next category we want to make sure is absolutely working up to speed is our brakes. If you don't have good brakes, especially responsive brakes, man, that could really end in catastrophe. And as we cruise down this hill here, you really get an idea of just how important they really are. So not just that they're up to working order, but check your pads and your rotors just to make sure that everything is in really good shape. If you're getting low on your pads, now's the time to change them before the summer season really gets going and you end up having to depend on them at the last minute. If you have mechanical brakes, these are a little easier to adjust than hydraulic brakes, simply because they're just cable wires. So once you loosen them, you adjust for your tension, you can tighten them back up, and then just make sure you have the appropriate amount of grip when the calipers are completely closed around the rotor. If you have hydraulic brakes, the adjustment's a bit more involved, but the most important thing is to make sure that the handle, the lever itself, doesn't plunge all the way down to the handlebars. If this is the case, it means you might need to bleed your brake line, as they only really need to move about an inch or so to do their job. You want to inspect the brake calipers and the pads themselves thoroughly to make sure that you're not right down to the metal, because you don't want to be damaging your rotors. If your pads look good, but you have an excessive amount of noise or squeaking, you might need to adjust your brakes, and I've done a complete video on how to do that. I'll leave that in the links below. It's a foolproof way to adjust your pads against your rotors that works every time and completely eliminates squeaks and noises for that, so you can check that out. And once those are done, you can basically check the pads and caliper operations, tighten it back up, and you're good to go. Next up is battery health. And especially if you store yours over the winter, whether it's removable or not, your battery health has everything to do with your scooter's operation. So you want to make sure that it's not only up to its peak performance, there's a couple of things you want to make sure when you store your scooter for the season if you live in a colder climate. So you want to make sure that you store it at about 80% instead of fully charged. This actually affects the way the battery itself can be stored. And the other thing is storing it in a climate that's pretty consistent. You don't want to get the battery excessively cold. Not only will you drop in performance, but it affects how the battery lasts over time. If your scooter has a removable battery, this makes the problem a lot easier to deal with, as you simply need to remove the battery out of the scooter come time for the season to end and store it indoors where it's a fairly controlled climate. If you don't, though, it makes it a bit more challenging because you have to store the entire scooter someplace where it doesn't get incredibly cold or freezing or incredibly hot. You also want to go through all of the scooter's electrical wiring just to make sure that everything is still making good contact, especially over a busy and really rough riding season. This stuff can come loose. And if you've added any additional electronics like headlamps or tail lamps or running lights, check these as well to make sure that they're in the working order you think they are, because this stuff can really get beat up over a season. And having them in good working order when you need them will pay dividends. Especially if you do a lot of night riding. You really want to make sure that all the stuff that was working last year is working this year. And that might seem obvious, but some of the stuff can really get rattled around, and you might end up having lamps that are out or certain parts of your running lights that aren't working. So it's a good idea just to do an overall check to make sure that all the stuff, headlamps, tail lights, brake lights, turn signals, all that stuff is still working the way it did last season. And one of the last categories we want to check is our tires. Tires are surprisingly important for the overall health of your scooter, especially when it comes to things like range, not just ride comfort. And sometimes it's common to reduce a little bit of the pressure to make the ride a little bit smoother. But for your overall scooter health as far as range, tires play a huge part in how much range your scooter is going to get. So keeping your tires properly inflated, as well as checking for wear and tear, especially uneven wear, is a really important part of your overall scooter's maintenance. Check your scooter's tires inflation recommendations because they can dramatically vary from manufacturer to manufacturer. The stock tires on your scooter probably have a very different inflation recommendation than the tires you might be replacing them with, like street tires, like PMT tires, for example, or ULIP dual tread tires. All these have different PSI recommendations. So follow that and you'll get the best range out of your scooter. Your motors are powerful, and over a riding season, they can undergo an amazing amount of stress and wear and tear. So check the lines to your motors regularly, even throughout the riding season, just to make sure that whatever ties hold them in place, including zip ties and things, are still firmly seated. Many of the more expensive scooters come with quick disconnect motor cables. This makes things like swapping out motors and changing tires so much easier, but it's a good idea to check these connections throughout the riding season because they get a lot of wear and tear. They're right down at the road level, so they're going to get rocks and dirt and mud and all that stuff. Make sure these are solid and tight connections, as they're also waterproof connections when they're completely secured. If they work their way loose, water can get into that connection. So make sure that line all the way into the back of the battery compartment is free of splits and tears. It's not being crimped by anything, by the shocks or anything like that, and you'll have trouble-free motor operation. Hey, thanks for hanging out with me, you guys. I appreciate it. Please hit the like and subscribe buttons if you get a chance. It helps keep a young channel like this going. It helps me make more videos like this. So get out there, clean up your ride, make sure it's ready for summertime. Rip it up. Catch you guys in the next video.